Taryn planted herself in the center of my living room, one hand on her hip, chin tilted just enough to be cruel, and looked straight at me. She let the silence stretch until my sister Mallory stopped mid-breath, then said, "You are not my real mother, so stop acting like you matter here." My husband Caleb did not flinch, did not step in, did not even offer me the cheap mercy of discomfort, and that hurt worse than her voice. I felt every eye in the room swing toward him because there are moments when a family knows the next sentence will either save a marriage or bury it. Caleb set his glass down, looked at me as calmly as if we were discussing weather, and said, "She is not your daughter. Erica, do not correct her." The room did not explode after that, which somehow made it uglier, because humiliation sounds smaller when it lands clean and public in a house you paid for. I smiled then, but it was not kindness, and it was not grace. Just the cold, steady smile of a woman watching the last lie fall apart. Taryn saw that smile and shifted her weight. Caleb reached for his drink again, and right there I knew neither of them had expected me to go quiet in that particular way. By sunrise, her tuition payment was frozen. Her access to the car was gone, and every comfort they had built on my money had started disappearing from under them. 3 years before that dinner, I had been a widow with a quiet house, steady hands, and a life that looked settled from the outside because grief does not always arrive looking messy. I owned a bridal alteration and vintage restoration studio in Chicago, paid my bills on time, kept my books clean, and slept in a house that had belonged to my first marriage long before Caleb Dorsey ever walked through the front door. When I met him, he knew exactly how to move through sorrow without stepping on it. And that kind of gentleness can feel dangerously close to safety when you have spent too long carrying silence by yourself. Caleb worked nights coordinating freight for an airport food supplier, and he had that calm, competent voice men use when they want you to believe order follows them naturally. He listened without interrupting, remembered details I had forgotten I shared, and when he met me after closing with takeout and said, "You should not have to be strong every second," I let that sentence go deeper than it should have. By the time we married, he had folded himself so neatly into my routines that I mistook familiarity for trust, and I mistook his gratitude for love because lonely women can misread relief as devotion. His daughter Taryn was 19. Sharp-faced, stylish, and already carrying herself like someone who believed other people's labor should arrive before she even asked for it. The first time she came into my kitchen, she looked around at the cabinets, the old hardwood, the bowl of lemons by the sink, and smiled with one side of her mouth before saying, "Cute house," in a tone that made cute sound temporary. I told myself she was young, grieving, and adjusting. But youth does not explain the way she used my gas card for weekends out, opened my refrigerator like a hotel minibar, and called me Erica with that flat little edge that always made respect feel optional. Caleb saw every bit of it, which mattered more than the rudeness itself, because he was always standing close enough to correct it and always choosing not to. When I reminded Taryn that the gas card was for school and work, she rolled her eyes, and Caleb gave me that tired half-smile and murmured, "She is still finding her footing. Do not make everything a test." As if boundaries were cruelty. My sister Mallory watched them leave one afternoon with shopping bags I had not approved, set her coffee down hard on my counter, and looked at me long enough for me to understand she had already named the truth I was still trying not to say. I planned that dinner because I wanted my house to feel settled again. Not staged. Not strained. Just full of warm plates, familiar voices, and proof that marrying Caleb had not been a mistake. Mallory arrived first with wine, kissed my cheek, and gave me that searching sister look she saved for moments when she thought I was pretending too hard. Then Caleb drifted in behind her carrying glasses like a man rehearsing charm. By the time Taryn came through the door in a fitted black sweater, phone in hand, and glanced around my dining room as if she were inspecting service, I already felt the evening leaning wrong. We made it through salad, bread, and 2 stories from Mallory before the first cut landed. Small enough to be missed if you did not know her voice. Some people get married and suddenly think they run every room. I set my fork down, kept my tone even, and told her, "If you have something to say in my home, say it clearly and say it respectfully." And she laughed like I had confirmed something for her. Then she leaned back, let her eyes slide toward Caleb instead of me, and said, "You are not my real mother, so stop acting like you matter here." And I felt the whole table go cold. Mallory's hand froze around my crevasse. My chest tightened, and I heard my own breath before I heard Caleb place his drink down with that careful little click that still turns my stomach. He looked straight at me, not embarrassed, not cornered, just calm in the ugliest way possible, and said, "She is not your daughter, Erica, so do not correct her." Taryn did not look shocked after that, which told me more than any confession could, because she did not glance up for rescue. She only watched my face to see whether the blow had landed exactly where they wanted. After everyone left, Caleb followed me upstairs with the same measured calm he used whenever he wanted to make something ugly sound reasonable, and told me I had embarrassed Taryn first. I turned toward him, still wearing the apron I had cooked in, and asked, "Did you hear what she said to me in my house?" But he only exhaled through his nose and called me too sensitive. When a man can watch his daughter insult his wife, then climb into bed acting inconvenienced by her pain, he is not confused. He is already committed elsewhere, and I saw that clearly. He fell asleep angry before midnight, but I stayed awake, took my earrings off at the bathroom sink, tied my hair back, and carried every last piece of my clarity downstairs. I sat at the dining table with the tuition portal open, the car access app glowing on my phone, my account binder spread wide, and every transfer I had excused sitting there in black and white. The gas card, the insurance payments, the school installment, the grocery runs Caleb always called temporary. All of it looked different under lamplight when no one was there to soften the truth for me. I did not cry, because by then I had moved past hurt and into inventory. And there is something brutally calming about numbers when people have spent months lying with words. I wrote down what belonged to me, what stood in my name, what I could stop by breakfast, and what I needed legal eyes on before either of them understood I was done being managed. By 3 a.m, my hands were steady, my coffee was cold, and my marriage looked exactly like what it had become, a financial shelter built on disrespect. At sunrise, I froze the next tuition payment, revoked Taryn's access to the car, canceled the standing transfer tied to her living expenses, and flagged the accounts Caleb never should have treated casually. 20 minutes later, my phone lit up with his name, and before I even answered, I could hear Taryn raging in the background about the car, the school notice, the card that no longer worked. I let the noise burn itself down, then answered in one flat breath, "If I have no place correcting her, Caleb, then I also have no obligation funding her." And that was the first honest sentence spoken in my house all night. After I hung up on Caleb, I pulled the account binder closer to make one more list, then reached into the locked drawer where I kept titles, passwords, and papers too important to trust to memory. Under the car documents and the folder for my house, I found an old cream envelope in Caleb's handwriting, one he had asked me to store months earlier because, as he put it, I still can't look at Natalie's things without falling apart. I opened it because the man claiming heartbreak had just spent the night minimizing mine, and grief loses its authority when the person carrying it has already been caught using tenderness like a disguise. The letter inside was written in blue ink on thick paper, dated months before Natalie died. And by the second paragraph, my hands had gone cold around the edges. She wrote that Caleb answered guilt with money, that Taryn had started learning how to mistake indulgence for love, and that any woman who came after her would suffer if Caleb kept choosing weakness over honesty. Then I reached the line that split me open quietly. Do not let loneliness turn you into a coward. And I read it twice because nothing in that sentence felt vague, accidental, or forgiving. I was still sitting there with the letter in my lap when the front door opened hard and Taryn came in first, flushed with anger, with Caleb close behind, wearing the face of a man who thought volume might reverse facts. She started before the door even shut. Fix this right now. My tuition is blocked and the car won't open. And I placed Natalie's letter on the table between us before answering anything else. Caleb saw the name, stopped short, and for the first time since the dinner his composure broke around the eyes, while I looked at both of them and understood something cleaner than revenge. That I had not imagined any of this. I had simply arrived late to a warning another woman had tried to leave behind. Owen Barrett arrived before noon, carrying a slim leather case and the kind of expression lawyers wear when they already know the answer but need the paper to say it aloud. Caleb straightened when he saw him, tried for a polite smile, and I watched that smile falter the moment Owen set a printed packet beside Natalie's letter. Taryn stayed near the kitchen archway with her arms folded tight, angry at first, then uneasy when she saw my lawyer slide county records across my own table like he belonged there more than either of them did. Owen did not begin with sympathy, which I appreciated, because sympathy can blur facts, and I needed facts sharper than feelings by then. He tapped the top page, looked at me instead of Caleb, and said, I pulled the Cook County record trail this morning, and there was an attempted filing tied to future residential interest and survivorship positioning involving your property. Caleb cut in too fast. Called it nothing. Just draft paperwork. But drafts do not explain supporting declarations. And Owen lifted the next sheet before I even had to ask. I kept my hands flat against the table because I had learned that stillness can hold more power than outrage when someone is already cornered by paper. Say it plainly, I told him. And Owen answered, someone was trying to build a stronger claim for Caleb to remain in this house or complicate transfer if anything happened to you, even though the title history does not support that move. The room went quiet after that. Not shocked exactly. More stripped down. Because once the words claim, transfer, and your property are spoken in the same breath, no marriage can hide inside politeness anymore. Caleb pushed back from the table and tried again, insisting he was only thinking long-term, only trying to protect his family. And that lie might have breathed longer if Owen had not turned to the last page. There, under dependency language tied to a future household arrangement, sat Taryn's name, and I saw the color leave her face before she even understood the phrasing. I looked from the paper to her and then to Caleb, and when I asked, why is she named in any plan touching my house? Neither of them answered quickly enough to pretend this had ever been a misunderstanding. Taryn finally stepped closer, took the page with shaking fingers, and read it twice as if the words might change if she stared hard enough. I did not know this was about her house, she said, but her voice had lost its edge. And Owen replied, you may not have understood the full legal effect, but your name was used to support a dependency position. Caleb moved toward her then, not to comfort her, only to get control back. And that was the moment I knew this had crossed far beyond insult. Money. Or family tension. Because he had not just married into my home. He had started building paperwork around it. Owen spread the rest of the documents across my coffee table. And the story Caleb had been selling me for months began collapsing under figures, dates, and paper trails. There had been life insurance after Natalie died. There had been money from the sale of her apartment. And there had also been losses, hidden debt, and a long pattern of explanations that kept changing depending on who was paying attention. Caleb tried to interrupt. But numbers do not blush, and paper does not soften itself for liars. And every page Owen turned made his breathing louder. Taryn was still holding the dependency page when Owen slid over the older records and said, this is where the money should have gone. And this is where the story stops matching. Her eyes moved from line to line, then up to Caleb. And for the first time since I met her, She looked young in the worst possible way. Not innocent, just frightened by the size of what she had helped carry. I asked her plainly, "What did you know?" And she swallowed once before admitting she knew there had been debt. Knew her father kept changing the version of what happened after Natalie died. And knew the story they repeated to me was never clean. Caleb snapped that she did not understand any of it. But that defense died the moment she turned on him and said she had signed forms because he told her they were needed to show our situation. I kept my eyes on her and asked, "Did you know you were helping him make me feel responsible for fixing what he had already broken?" And she cried before answering because the question had landed exactly where the truth lived. Then it all came out in pieces too sharp to mistake. That he coached her before money conversations. That he mocked generous people after they left. And that the night before the dinner, he told her I had started asking too many questions. I felt something colder than heartbreak settle into place when Taryn finally whispered the part that explained everything. That Caleb said if they could make me feel small enough in my own house, I would stop acting like I belonged there. She covered her face and confessed she laughed when he said it, not because it was funny, but because cruelty had become easier than shame. And I let that sit in the room without rescuing her from it. When I looked at her again, I did not call her confused, manipulated, or caught in the middle, because none of those names fit what the evidence had already proved. And I said, "No, Taryn, you were not just there. You were part of it." Once Taryn admitted she had laughed with Caleb the night before, something final settled inside me, cold and clean, and I understood that kindness without rules had nearly cost me everything. I looked at Caleb and told him he would pack a bag, leave my house that day, and speak to me only through Owen from that moment forward. He tried the same tired language, saying I was angry, impulsive, blowing one bad dinner into a permanent decision. But his voice already sounded smaller than the paper. Owen stayed calm and practical, opening his folder again, laying out the next legal steps, and giving my decision a frame no one in that room could sentimentalize. I told him to file the notice, change the locks, place the fraud alert, revise my estate documents, and document every attempted claim touching my property. Caleb stared at me like he was waiting for one last softening, then muttered, "You are throwing everything away." And I answered, "No, I am removing you from what was never yours." Then I turned to Taryn, because her part required a different kind of precision. Not softer, not blurred, just clearer. And clarity was the only mercy I trusted anymore. I told her the tuition money was over. The car was over. The transfers were over. And none of those decisions would be reopened for debate. Then I gave her the only grace I could live with. 14 days in my guest room, under strict rules. No access to my files. No touching my accounts. No performance. She looked stunned by that more than she had been by losing money. And maybe that made sense, because consequences are easier to resent than boundaries you cannot manipulate. I told her those 14 days were for getting a job, dealing honestly with school, telling Owen every paper she had signed, and finding somewhere else to live. Mallory stood near the doorway listening, and when I finished, she gave one small nod. Because she understood I was not rescuing either of them. I was finally setting the price. The days after Caleb left did not feel triumphant, because real relief rarely arrives smiling. It arrives when the locks click and stay changed. Owen handled the filings. The fraud alert held. And Caleb's messages shifted from apology to blame to silence without pulling me back in. Taryn kept the 14 days, found part-time work, answered Owen's questions, and stopped moving through my house like anything belonged to her. I took the wedding photos down first, boxed Caleb's last things, and stood in my living room long enough to feel the air settle. The kitchen stayed clean because no one raided it carelessly. My account binder stayed closed, and my sleep returned fully. Mallory started dropping by on Fridays, set tea on the table, looked around at the quiet, and murmured, It feels like your house again. That was healing. Not softness. Not forgetting. Just the steadiness that comes after you stop negotiating with disrespect and stop calling it love. Taryn left when the 2 weeks ended, carrying her own bags, her own consequences, and one apology I accepted, without pretending trust had returned. I did not get my peace back by being chosen well. I got it back by choosing myself completely. And that peace felt stronger than love. If my story stayed with you, leave me a comment and tell me whether you would have walked away sooner or fought for the truth exactly when I did. And if you believe peace should feel honest, not borrowed. Stay with me, like this video, and subscribe for more stories.